Call the November 1st Board of Selectmen meeting to order. We'll accept the agenda by unanimous consent. I don't believe there are any changes. Announcements.
Okay, we got a number of announcements here, so bear with me. This meeting is being video and audio recorded. The sewer director, David Gray, is away today, and we have Drew from Weston and Sampson here to give us a brief overview of the Nantucket Harbor Shimo Plus Area Sewer Project. We're also going to give you a quick little update about the C Street Pump Station Project, and Kevin from Hazen and Sawyer is not here yet, but hopefully he will be, and there's a little bit of an issue with C Street that we wanted to just tell you about. So, Drew, thank you.
As Libby said, I'm Drew Padnott from Weston Sampson Engineers. I'm the Chief Resident Engineer on the Shimo and Plus Parcel Sewer Extension Project. And Dave Gray asked me to come and give a quick little update. As you see up here, this is our 3-week look ahead that we distribute every week. We have 2 mainline crews working right now. Every day I'm with crew number 1 on Vesper Lane. They're currently west of Cato Lane, progressing towards Hummock Pond Road. They will continue onto Hummock Pond and ultimately end at the Hussey Farms intersection. That crew will then move into the Hussey Farms neighborhood. We call it the Meadowview Drive area, and they'll be there through the duration of the project. Mainline sewer crew number 2 began on McLean Lane, and they progressed to Tashima. And today they're actually finishing up most of their temporary trench pavement. They've installed all of the mainline sewers, and they've actually done all the stubs from the main out off the edge of the roadway that homeowners will eventually connect to. We actually have another engineer with that crew at all times. His name is Joe Mealy from City Point Partners, who couldn't be here tonight. In the McLean and Tashima area, before the crew mobilized out, they actually did install all of the stubs off of the roadway. So there will be a crew coming back, excuse me, from a sub of the contractor to do building of inverts in the manholes and raising castings to grade, and then much farther down the line doing final pavement and surface restoration. Again, in the Vesper Lane, Hummock Pond area, they will have a separate crew that's specialized to come back and reconnect all the currently sewered customers from the existing 6-inch line to the new 12-inch main. I don't think Kevin's here yet, so I'm sorry. Erica will take his place.
About that issue, about C Street. Sure.
Okay, so last week we were supposed to get the bypass connection done on C Street, so that we can have the sewer flowing during the project rehab. We had a little bit of issues with that, and so what we're going to be doing now is a stop line in C Street, and that is actually going to take a few days to do. Tomorrow they're going to be excavating, trenching, and dewatering and shoring. There's going to be a stop line equipment that's going to be up in the roadway. So C Street at South Beach Street is going to be blocked right at that junction. The pipe will be protruding from the street for a couple of days. It should all be wrapped up by Sunday, at which time I believe we should be online with the bypass. But it's just we had to go to a plan B because plan A didn't go quite as expected. But the crew has been doing a great job, and we should be good to go this weekend. But the street will be closed starting tomorrow through Sunday.
Thank you.
It's good to have plan B.
We can give Kevin's fee to Erica. Oh,
That's him.
was that him? Okay, he's too late. DPW is sponsoring a landfill groundwater monitoring forum on Thursday, November 9th at 6:30 here in this room. If people are interested in that, please attend. The Veterans Day observance ceremony will be held Saturday, November 11th at 10:30 at the Federal Street War Memorial, which is next to the town building. And if the weather is bad, it'll move over to Legion Hall. Children's Beach Boat Ramp, as we know, will be closed until January 15th. The 2018 annual town meeting warrant is currently open for citizen article submittals until November 20th. hopefully everybody remembers, we have a special town meeting next Monday, November 6th. It starts at 6 p.m. at the high school. We've had, hopefully everybody's also gotten their warrant by now. The warrants were mailed out last week. So please bring your warrant to town meeting, and we do need a quorum for a couple of the financial articles, so we really do need good attendance. We are going to have a special, if you didn't get the warrant, let us know, but it's online also for people, and we will have copies at the town meeting. As a result of one of the articles on the special town meeting warrant, which is a supplemental appropriation for the fire station, we have a special election scheduled for November 28th to vote on the approval that's required for that. And lastly, it came in late, occurred late, so it's not on the agenda, but I wanted to get the board a brief announcement, more of an update really, about some situations that occurred in Mattakit on Sunday and Monday with the storm that we had. And I'm going to have DPW director and chief of police give just quick overviews about what they've worked on in the past few days. We have done a little bit of shoring up for the bridge, and there's the development of an potential evacuation plan if need be. And I want to just remind the board that we are about to embark on a coastal resiliency planning effort, which will cover situations like this. It's obviously going to take a little time, and there were some citizen inquiries about getting Army Corps of Engineers assistance for some way to address the erosion issue out there. And what we did have a staff member call the Army Corps, and they told us what we pretty much expected, which is if the town submits an application to them, they will consider it, but they don't come and help you figure out your problem.
And they don't engineer it for
They
you.
don't, unfortunately, engineer it for you, which would be great, but that's not happening. So, Rob, I'm going to give a little bit of an update about the bridge.
Good evening. As you probably know, there was a breach during the high tide with the excessive southeast, southwest varying wind. The high winds caused a breach next to the stilted house here. Even in this fairly early picture, 2017, you can see an earlier breach that brought sand from the beach down into the top of the salt marsh in Hither Creek. What occurred, and just for reference, this is Millie's Bridge here, the intersection with Mattakit Road. So what's continued to happen is, in this most recent event, the breach has accentuated, I think because of the deposit of sand that was already here. The path of least resistance tended to be in this direction, and essentially the tide waters came in, moved down in this direction, and started to flow under the bridge. As it did that, it continued to fill and fill and fill with sand. We do have some pictures of that if you haven't been out there. And so there was this path of tide water that came down generally in this direction and began to pile up debris down in the corner here. At the time, we really saw the embankment of the roadway behind the abutment of the bridge as being potentially subject to scour and erosion. So we brought in Toscana under our emergency contract, and we installed some concrete blocks, essentially further armoring this part of the roadway embankment to prevent any potential scour. That's essentially the actions that we took. Thankfully, things settled down, and the next high tide cycle obviously didn't come over. But yeah, it's just a tremendous amount of sand deposits here. Sure. You can see
It's
this.
incredible. It's millions of pounds or whatever.
Yeah, this is
It's-
just a panoramic, so that's why it's got a strange angled ends on this. But standing on the bridge, doing just a panoramic shot, you could see the dramatic amount of sand that has filled what was once pretty extensive salt marsh and associated grassland. And you can see pretty defined the gap now between the stilted house and the next adjacent home.
It looks like it almost filled half of it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
While the chief is coming down, I just wanted the board also to know that town council and I also have discussed the legal obligations of the town to maintain access to the properties on the other side of the bridge. And there are some legal obligations if the bridge were to become unfunctional. And we would have to make necessary repairs to it. They could potentially, by statute, be assessed by betterment. The cost of that could be betterments. I don't know. I'm not saying that we would do that, but it is an option. And that's the future of the bridge, I think, is something that we're going to be looking at as well in our update to our hazard mitigation planning process, which is underway now.
Yeah, thank you. We have a plan in place in the event. Our big concern with this bridge being breached or being made unpassable, unsafe, is that we would have very limited access to Smith's Point, that portion of Matticat. We do have a plan in place for emergency response and evacuation, and it involves the staging of emergency vehicles at Matticat Marine and the use of the Harbor Master's pre-staged vessel, which is at Matticat Marine year-round, to transport paramedics, firefighters if there's a medical or a fire, or police officers if there's a police emergency to that area. We do also maintain a list of residents that we believe are out in that area. That way, if for some reason a sudden breach occurs and we need to get out there, we know right where to go rather than search every house up front. And this is a plan that we've had in part in place for a long time. We deal with it with Tuckernuck. We deal with it with Esther's Island. We deal with it now with Smith's Point whenever emergencies and inclement weather like hurricanes and things come along. And so we thought it was kind of important to let the residents out in that area know that we haven't forgotten them. We do have a plan. And to touch on what the town manager just mentioned about our hazard mitigation plan, the town's in the process of rebuilding our hazard mitigation plan. And part of that process involves the town having to identify, I believe, 5 projects that are doable. And the DPW director and I and the natural resources coordinator, Jeff Carlson, yesterday just had a very brief discussion. And preliminarily, we think this is probably one of the areas that we'll be looking at for that project. And why is that important? Because if it's in that plan, it opens up the potential for hazard mitigation FEMA funds to do things like relocations, movements, armoring, raising roads, building bigger abutments, things like that on roads. But the thing to remember is that plan is a 3-year process to develop, and then any projects beyond that have to go through the permitting, the design, and the engineering. So it's years away, even if that's the way we're able to go. But we do have the emergency plan, and as part of our plan, the DPW and the building department, our big concern out in Esther Island or Smith's Point is if the utilities get cut off, there's a real concern because a lot of those places have tight tanks, and a lot of them have septic tanks or need electricity to make them work. And without those utilities, then it's possible that the buildings would have to be condemned for habitation, which would require us to relocate temporarily and then longer term individuals that are out there in the event that the road or the bridge is dislodged.
One last thing. There were some homes that were considered to be very close to the edge, and there was some question the other day about whether or not they should be condemned or what their status was. And Roberto, I believe, health director, and somebody from the building department have been out to look at the houses. I just didn't get around today to figure out the status. If you want to just very, very quickly. And while Roberto's coming up, I want to thank all the town staff that responded to this, going out and looking and assessing everything, because they really got right out there and developed these plans very quickly.
Yeah, at around 7:30 in the morning, JC from Natural Resources was out there and noticed the breach, and he got the ball rolling really quick. So Natural Resources really deserves a lot of the credit here. We knew that in the corner here, down here by the bridge, there was a home that 353, there you go, perfect, thank you. This home right here, 353 Madaket Road, was dangerously close to the bluff based on some erosion that we had earlier, based on the previous storms. So on Sunday, that home was actually moved back about 50 feet or so. This one storm took out their entire foundation about where it was, from where it was. It uncovered their septic system, which is approximately in this location, is shared with this house. It's shared with this house and this house. The septic system was approximately here. The honeycomb from the leach pit is actually out on the beach now, and the tank is being removed. One of the properties has recently connected itself to a tight tank so that they can maintain habitability for the time being. The house that had been moved has been declared uninhabitable, and they've already expressed their intent to demolish it to us. The second home that is connected to the same septic system, because they have nowhere to put their wastewater, has also been deemed uninhabitable. There are two more homes that you don't see in this location because they are out on Sheep Pond. They also had significant amount of erosion, 16 Sheep Pond and 29 Sheep Pond. Their septic system has also been compromised, and we have declared those two houses uninhabitable as well. This one storm ultimately destroyed 6 homes when you count the Stilt house as well. And this is the first storm of the season, so we can expect more.
Do the ones that have been declared uninhabitable, do they have the option of tight tanks in Sheep's Pond, or?
In Sheep Pond, the two on Sheep Pond actually still have enough room to put in a replacement system. They just kind of need to push it. One of the caretaker for 16 actually declared his intent to demolish the home as well, because it was only an ancillary structure, really, that the property owner doesn't want to keep it. The other home at 29, they still have approximately 20,000 square feet left, and they can move the system to the back.
Gotcha.
All right. Thank you.
This is the public comment portion of our agenda. This is when someone can bring something to our attention that's not otherwise on our agenda for discussion. Hearing none, I don't believe there's any new business, so we'll move on to approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts.
Move to approve.
Minutes?
Minutes, yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Approval of payroll warrants and the treasury warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Approval of pending contracts. Are there any questions on the contracts?
I had one quick question, Madam Chair, about the People GIS and the sewer. Does that connect with the InterGov things that we're doing with Plus, or is it separate, or?
I don't know if anybody's here to answer that. David's away, but I think that it does not connect right at the moment, and I'm not sure if there's a future connectability to it, but he needed to get something going for his particular situation.
Okay, thanks.
Can we take the first two? And I have a comment on the last two.
Sure. Does someone want to make a motion to approve the first two?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Matt?
No, and I just want to be consistent. I think we've got two memorandums of agreement on union contracts. They're at the 3% a year range, which is not sustainable. When you add in when you add in OPED and other benefits, it's more than the budget, which means we're crowding out capital and maintenance and repair and new hires at that level. So that's number one. We're not using wage and benefit information. We're not doing a study or analysis of those, which I think is necessary. I think there are some positions where you're giving a straight amount. I think there are some positions, middle and lower tier, that deserve more money than they're receiving if we're going to be able to attract them and keep them here. And this does not do that. The guys in the trenches doing the grunt work, we need to retain some of them. So, for that reason, I will oppose these two, just for the record. And I just want to be consistent.
Understood.
So, I don't know how much we can talk about the deliberation, but I had a different read from my participation on your comments. And I don't know if anyone from town administration wants to speak to that.
I think the HR director is prepared to review the contract if the board would like to.
Steve Tuzik, Director of Labor Relations. And the question specifically with regard to the contracts, Jim? To go over what we discussed, it's a 3%, 3%, 3% for officers and patrol. And that's broken into, upon July 1st, 2017, 2%, then a 1% January 1st of 2018, and every 6-month increment thereafter, 1.5%. We rolled the $400 academy stipend into the base salary. The details were for year one, $66 for patrol, or $56 for patrol, $58 the following year, $60 the following year. Officers were $10 more than that, so 66, 68, and 70. And then the personnel files, we're going to house those for ease, consistency, legal reasons, and so forth, down to the Human Resources vault at 16 Broad Street.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a piece of the increase that was cost of living, but also a piece that was to bring it in line with some other communities
Madam Chair, great.
for this
great comment.
particular union?
There's a 2% market adjustment that was agreed to over the overall 9%. We did conduct analysis and benchmarks against other island communities, the Cape, and we found that this was appropriate.
And that's my kind of my comment or rebuttal to Matt, that we spent a lot of time looking at the market, the competition, if you
Correct.
will, and that's certainly important, probably the most important, what is from my experience, a critically important measure. So.
Well, I didn't expect it to be. Basically, I've had the same comment at a lot. These guys have heard it multiple times. I just think it's important for the community to hear it, and I think we did a very good job with this. But I think we need to do better if we're going to find a way to retain people, and if we're going to find a way to be able to hire new people and going forward. So I think was improvement to be made, and I think we need a different strategy than everybody gets the same thing. And unless somebody is willing to speak up and say that, I don't know that we'll ever get there, so I'm saying it.
Thank you. Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the last two items on the contracts.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
4-1. We have a couple of consent items, gift acceptances, and just a notification of an hour change for Hatch's Liquor Store. Somebody want to make a motion on those?
Motion to approve?
Both?
For both.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Town managers report.
Okay, we've got, first off, a review of our preliminary public outreach plan for the Harbor Place project, and we'd like to introduce the Harbor Place Intermodal Center consultants that we talked about last week. So Janet Schulte is going to take us through our preliminary public outreach plan, then we're going to introduce the consultants, and they are here, and you all have met them a little bit at the beginning of the meeting.
Good evening. Janet Schulte, Office of Culture and Tourism, and I'm going to take you through the role that I will play in this process and some initial thoughts about how that process will go forward. So I have been named the project representative for the town of Nantucket on the Harbor Place feasibility project. And the reason that we thought this was an appropriate fit within the portfolio of the Office of Culture and Tourism is that my department serves visitors and residents and assists everybody in helping to identify transportation options in different modes around the island. So we are committed to serving both populations. I will report directly to the town manager and will be on efforts to facilitate communication about the project and actions and recommendations that occurred during the feasibility study. I have three foci in the process. So first, obviously, is to establish communication about the study between Desmond Design Management, the consultant group, and the Joint Oversight Work Group. That group consists of the owners group from the three owners, members of the Board of Selectmen, planning board members, the town manager, the director of planning, and others who yet to be named. In function, I serve as staff to the Joint Oversight Work Group to develop and collect information, maintain list of committee issues, make appointments, track questions, and track decisions made or to be made. The second area of my focus is to identify, and we've already started this, key stakeholders and interested parties, and to establish communication channels between them and the Desmond Group. And finally, will be to oversee public outreach efforts on the project. So in terms of who we've identified as key town officials to meet with Desmond, it's the Board of Selectmen, Police Department, Fire Department, the Regional Transit Authority, Planning, Department of Public Works, the airport, and my office, and we probably will identify others as we move forward. In fact, we had a brief meet and greet today, and there are a couple more areas that were named already. We will have identified key commissions and committees that should meet with the group: the Conservation Commission, the Visitor Services Advisory Committee, Disability Commission, and Land Bank Commission. There will probably be others that come up that should be added to that list. And we are identifying media outlets: the Inquirer and Mirror, WACK-FM, Geno TV, and of course our very own Channel 18. We will also be working to collect key information and relevant data that we know already exists. We've got a list of traffic and parking studies and probably have more to add to that. Transportation statistics for the ferries and the airport. We're going to look at comparable communities information, studies that have been made of the downtown by different groups, planning studies, and prior actions at annual town meeting by this body, the Board of Selectmen, and by the NPEDC Commission. The public outreach campaign begins with some open public forums that the Desmond team will come here to present. We want to have one early that will inform the public about the feasibility study. We'll do one midway that provides an update and feedback with community members on what it is that's being learned and what some of the thoughts are that are coming forward. And we'll do one towards the end of the process that will report on findings and gain additional feedback. Group presentations will be done by myself and Dave Fredericks. We have already identified some transportation providers that we think we should reach out to. They include the Taxi Association, the van tour operators, bike rental agents, and people who hold permits in the town lot. There are probably others as well that we haven't thought about yet that should be in there. We want to have a meeting with the ferry services because obviously this facility could potentially will serve the Steamship Authority, Highline, Sea Streak, and Freedom, the one that comes in from Harwich Port in the summer. Dave and I have listed a number of community groups that we want to make sure we're in front of: the Nantucket Civic League, the Community Association, Rotary, non-voting taxpayers, the Town Association, chamber groups, lodging association, the Downtown Business Association, and school and community sports groups, because that's a pretty high-end user of parking downtown and moving through that area when they're picking up teams or picking up children or dropping children off. And obviously we want to talk to abutters and neighbors in the group as well. So that's a quick overview of what the public outreach campaign is, and then I want to introduce Andy Hill from the Desmond Group to introduce his organization.
Good evening. My name is Andy Hill. I'm the Director of Consulting Services for Desmond. And I wanted to open up by saying thank you. Thank you so much. We are honored and grateful to have this opportunity to work in the community. When this was first presented to us, I took this to Steve Rabor, the president of the company, and explained to him that I wanted to bring every resource to bear in order to go and pursue this and hopefully win this project, because we see this as a marquee project for our firm going forward. Nantucket is such a notable and unique community. The feeling is that we really wanted to earn the opportunity to work here and to see this process through successfully. So among other things, it's a feather in our cap as we go forward. We can boast that we were the folks that worked with Nantucket and helped them realize their vision. So thank you again. Real quick background on Desmond. Folks often, initially when they encounter our name, assume that there's a Mr. Desmond somewhere in the background. Desmond is actually a hybridization of design management, and the entire idea came from our two founders, Giri Chabra and John Fujiwara, an architect and an engineer who started working out of an apartment in New York City looking for a better way to go through system design, development, and management, a way that was more innovative, collaborative, transparent, and effective. From those humble beginnings, we've grown to a company of 115 folks in 8 different offices around the country here. We are architects, engineers, planners, economists, green garage consultants. That's a real thing these days. And we have been lucky enough to work in some fantastic and notable projects, especially recently and within this area. Across the bottom, you'll see 3 pictures. In the left-hand side is a collaborative project we did with Boston University, the New Balance Field project, where we actually integrated the development of a parking garage with a NCAA regulation lacrosse field. This project includes a number of sustainable elements that allowed us to go forward and actually win an award from the National Parking Association for sustainable design. Hand in glove with that, on the far right-hand side, you will see the garage that we did for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which is a completely carbon neutral facility here. It actually contributes energy back to the grid by nature of its design. And in the middle is recently completed the intermodal station that we did for Salem, Massachusetts for the MBTA, which shares some similarities with Nantucket here in that they're both tourist-oriented communities. You're talking about the integration of multiple modal systems into a single facility, plus significant patronage from surrounding neighborhoods. Within my team, we've brought forward Norm Goldman as principal in charge. Norm has been in the business for a long time. Many decades. Norm was part of the team that did the MBTA Intermodal Center here, and he will be leading our design effort. He's backed up by Bob Weisenborn, who's our architect, and Bill Fair, who's going to be supporting out of the Boston office on the engineering side. I will be the project manager, and I will be addressing a lot of the planning, financial feasibility, and economic aspects of this project as well. The process that we have put together is intended to be collaborative in nature. There are a number of squares up there that were supposed to show up as orange that have actually come across as yellow, which once again proves the folly of using PowerPoint on any type of public presentation. But the idea of each one of these yellow squares is that it is an opportunity as we're going through the design process to stop, come back, and review the work that we've done before, present it to our stakeholders and the folks who are going to be steering the process, and getting feedback from them before we move into the next design phase here. This is an iterative process which starts with a broad-scale preliminary design process, looks at different components of reuse that can be integrated into the design. The idea that this may not always be a parking garage. It might want to be something else in the future as time goes on. Integrates a number of the different intermodal characteristics and intermodal uses that we've understood and come to learn are going to be a key part of this project. and then refines these down to a couple of designs that we can then start taking a look at in terms of cost, how we might fund these, if there is a revenue stream from them, how that might contribute to the debt service along these way. And ultimately, it comes back to a matrix analysis where we sort these designs out to the ones that are most suitable to the community based on our understanding from talking to the community of their values and concerns. And that will be distilled into a final report and then brought before the public. We see this as about a 6-month process at this point in time. And we anticipate being in front of you quite a bit during the course of the winter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's all good.
If there's no questions by anybody,
I actually do have a question. Sorry. Have you done one where there's? Have you done a project where there's so much seasonality in the town where you're putting in?
Yes.
A parking garage?
I actually just finished an engagement about a year ago with the town of Bar Harbor, which was a 2-year engagement, looking at the introduction of a parking structure in downtown. And there were a number of similarities. It's also an island community. It's very seasonal. There's a significant tourist trade that comes in, and there was a great deal of concern about how this would integrate into the downtown streetscape and how it would integrate into the community as a whole.
And is there anything from that that you think would be, I'm sure that would be relevant to Nantucket in terms of aesthetics or function or what happens in the winter?
Yeah, there's a lot of carryover, a lot of transference between that. We spent quite a bit of time considering how the design might integrate into the downtown and enhance it rather than detract from it. The role that structured parking might be coming into an environment that doesn't support that right now. How it might be used in the off-season. There were some interesting takeaways from that. They have I suspect, a much smaller off-season population than you folks do. But there was a tremendous hunger for storage space within the facility. And so as we were looking at design iterations, one of the design iterations we were looking at was the ability to potentially, if you will, box some of the spaces in there to create artificial storage containers in the off-season for fishermen, summer folks, et cetera, to store equipment as well as vehicles during the off-season. Which was not something that we had ever really anticipated, a garage cum storage facility, but it worked well in that design in that instance.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage of the collaborative process where you can get that input.
Yeah, it was a very collaborative process. We were, like I said, it was a 2-year cycle. I think I was up to Bar Harbor about 25 times during the course of that. Was lucky enough to see it in all seasons. Worked very closely with the Citizens Advisory Committee, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, local head of the Chamber of Commerce. Spent a lot of time with outreach with downtown citizens and business owners. And ultimately learned a great deal from that. I think we can bring to bear here.
Great. Do you do anything in particular or anything different for stormwater management? Because I would imagine there'd be quite a bit of runoff from these, and it would be a particularly sensitive area on Nantucket where it's going in. So is there anything, is it just sort of standard where it goes into tanks or anything that you've done specifically?
Actually, more and more, there are a number of unique or creative things you can do with it. You know, the classic is that it goes into a storage tank and then a separator unit, and then typically goes out into the local stormwater management system. You can do retention, clarification, and reuse in order to employ it to actually serve as irrigation water for plantings in and around the area here. We had a lot of success with that on that Boston University project.
Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, thanks so much for
Thank you.
coming and for being on board.
Yeah.
I'm excited to go through the process.
We're looking forward to this. Thank you.
thank you, Andy. Next, we have an update regarding the Comcast cable TV license renewal. We've given you maybe a couple of updates recently, maybe over the past several months. And Greg is going to give us a little overview of what's been happening most recently.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Board. The town's franchise license agreement with Comcast expires in October of 2019, a couple of years from now. So on October 13th of, on March 13th of this year, we received a notification from Comcast to engage in an assertion period to renew the contract. It's a very engaged process that's actually regulated by the Cable Communications Act of 1984. So the town has engaged the services of Bill Hewig from KP Law, as well as a gentleman from Amherst, Mass., who is a cable franchise expert, to help navigate this process. Our intent over the next year and a half is to, per our outline and our timeframe on the memo, is to engage the public, to discuss the cable services that are provided through Comcast. This license agreement also provides our PEG channel, our public education and government channel, which is financed through our cable subscriptions. This is only for cable television, cable services. It is not for internet. And the intent is to have a business plan to the Board of Selectmen by 1 year from this month. So by November of 2018, for the board to review and react to based on public input, and then to start negotiations with Comcast in January of 2019. It's anticipated that it'll take about 6 months. Any questions?
I kind of have one. Does the internet run under a different wiring than the TV?
In some instances, yes. Sometimes it actually goes through like a Verizon system, but the cable that we can lay, that we can actually negotiate and maybe upgrade, would help provide better services. However, they make it very clear that they're not negotiating any of the internet service.
I understand that, but if there, like, one question that I'd like you guys to dig into, when we hit peak, there's, and I've done this with my IT guy. When we hit peak, there's a couple bottlenecks, and they aren't necessarily even on the island, but there are bottlenecks that are leading to latency. And so it's things like, and if the TV and the internet are on the same wires going up in the air and going across, there's something on that side that's leading to a lot of dropped calls and a lot you can't clear, credit cards and a bunch of other things that are happening. And it only happens on the really busy weekends for like 8 or 10 weeks.
Right.
But I think that it's all on the same equipment. And so somehow something has to be upgraded there, would have a huge impact on a lot of people. So when you get into it, that would be something to look at. What when we're at peak, what is the capabilities of their equipment for cable on the other side? How much can run through the wires?
It's definitely one of the top 5 of our business plan. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is a review of preliminary proposed warrant articles sponsored by the town for the 2018 annual town meeting. So this is early on, but I thought I would take you through this and get any other input that the board might have on some of these items. So you have an outline in your packet, and the first 22-ish or so articles are all annual articles that are always in the warrant. They have to do with budgets, capital projects, other types of appropriations. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. Then I have another section called Other Selectmen-Sponsored Articles, and most of the ones I've categorized them. Most of these have been discussed by either town admin and the board or both since the last annual town meeting. So first, we have Affordable Housing Trust appropriation. Now, that is going to ultimately come through as a budget item for fiscal 19, but we have had a separate article appropriating making an appropriation for the Affordable Housing Trust. So I would imagine, unless the board thinks otherwise, that we would do that again. But again, the number will be coming through to you through the budget presentation. The establishment of a special purpose stabilization fund for substance abuse prevention efforts, or something similar to that. This has come up in connection with the local option marijuana tax that is Article 3 of the special town meeting. And The Finance Committee actually raised this early on when they were reviewing the warrant articles and asked if that tax could go into this fund. And it can with some statutory conditions, but it wasn't able to be amended because it was outside the scope of the article for the special town meeting. Unlikely anyway that it would happen before the annual. So we, if pending board being okay with it, would prepare a warrant article to get at this for the annual.
We'd have to have a question, we'd have to have a good conversation of whether that's an intelligent policy or not. You know, we have to project how much money it will be and whether that's, you know,
Yeah.
what the other impacts will be. I understand, once you put it in that fund, you have to have a vote to take it back out of that fund, and you lose flexibility. So I
Yep.
think, as a board, we need to be careful.
Yeah, I was interested, Matt, on how specific it is. Right? Can we make it a little general, or what happens if we realize this is too much money for?
I think it can be somewhat general, but if it's for something like substance abuse prevention efforts and we want to spend it on a new town building, that's not going to work.
Right.
But maybe, you know, I don't know. We'd have to talk about how broad.
Maybe,
Okay.
or could we maybe set a dollar figure that so much of it would, no. That so much would go into the fund out of that tax, and then the rest could be used for other purposes.
Okay, to the general, straight to the general fund,
Or maybe another designated purpose.
Yes, I'd be happy to take a look at that specific question. I do think you can do that. But the other point is that if you found that there was too much money being built up in the fund, you could go back to town meeting and change the parameters of the fund, the purposes for which the money could be spent.
So maybe just be thinking about what purposes we'd want to do here. Reappropriation of $100,000 for Tom Nevers Playground. We've talked about this before, and I think the board had said, put this on the annual, not on the special. And this would be reappropriation of $100,000 for the playground to costs associated with development of a master plan for Tom Nevers Park. Establishment of an appropriation for a special purpose stabilization fund for future payments of accrued liabilities in connection with employees leaving employment of the town. That's a mouthful, but this was an article that we had at the end, at the 2017 annual, that the airport put forward. And Finance Director and I have discussed doing a similar article for the town so that we can at least have the beginnings of a set aside for employees who would be leaving with like long-time employees who'd be leaving with substantial payouts. We'd put money in here so that we don't have to dip into the budget so much during the year when they do retire or leave. And then appropriation to update the financial assurance mechanism for the landfill. This is a DEP requirement that we believe, we need to do a little bit more research on this, is going to be coming up in 2018. Got a category for zoning bylaw and general bylaw amendments. Don't have a list yet from planning, but possibly, maybe depending on what happens at the special, we might want to refine our retail marijuana zoning. So I just put that in there as something of a placeholder. General bylaws, we've talked a little bit about this internally, and I've talked with a couple of you about it, about the possibility of amending Chapter 33 of the Town Code, that is a chapter entitled Personnel, to include airport and Wanakama employees in that section of the code instead of excluding them, so as to be more uniform with personnel policies. The second bylaw item, this came up a few times over the year, amend Chapter 124, sign, satellite dishes, and roof lines to maybe prohibit, maybe further regulate outdoor televisions or indoor monitors visible from a public way. Now, at one point, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when this maybe initially came up, I had some comments from the Sign Advisory Committee, and I asked them to give me a proposal about what they'd want to see in a bylaw. I never really did get that. And I think off and on, there's been discussion when, a particular situation arises since then. So I'm not sure if we want to do this or not, if we want to get a recommendation from them. But as I think you all know, it's come up.
Maybe we could ask the HDC and the sign advisory through them to try to come up with a proposal, because it does keep coming up as an issue.
Sure. I can do that.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful because we always say we don't want to piece this one by one. There's no policy to look at. I like it.
I will ask them. for
Another
some
interesting, and I don't need to make more for ourselves, but just a interesting thing. I was reading Aspen Times and a couple other Colorado newspapers and looking at all the different issues they've had with recreational and medical marijuana. And one of the issues, which is kind of funny, is signage. They're limiting the signage to a certain size in Aspen so that it's not predominant. So what the owners of these businesses are doing, and they've got 8 now and potentially 5 more in the pipeline, they'll have another business with the same name so they can put the huge sign next to the door of their marijuana place so people will find it. So, it's sort of interesting how people use loopholes, so it'll be, Joe's Pot Shop will be next to Joe's Hamburgers, and that way they can have the big Joe sign up. And it's kind of, so they're tightening up their sign laws now because of the impact of the retail marijuana business in Colorado, which I thought was kind of funny.
So the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund, when you establish that by vote of town meeting, it can be a percentage of a particular receipt, but not less than 25%.
Okay, next, we've talked a little bit from time to time about mandating private property owners to remove snow in front of commercial establishments in certain areas. I think a few years ago we tried this, but it was viewed as too broad because I don't think we really refined it to certain areas. So it comes up from time to time, but we don't currently have a bylaw that specifies this. So it's something we may want to think about for liability purposes. I think a number of towns have something like this. John and I have talked a bit about it. So just something for you to think about. Home rule petitions. Currently, we have 2 that have already been through 2 town meetings that are still pending at the legislature. The real estate transfer fee for housing and a land bank act amendment regarding an affordable housing restriction. So I'm anticipating we would put those forward again if they don't make it through the legislative process this year. Internally, we've discussed rescinding a home rule petition that we had a few years ago to establish a Nantucket mosquito control project. As it turns out, the Nantucket Mosquito Control Project is part of a wider state mosquito control, I forget what it's called, the State Reclamation Board. And they control all the bidding, and they want you to send they want us to send them our revenue or our appropriation for this, and then they control everything, and we don't have much of a say in it, and we are finding that to be much too restrictive. So we'd rather go out on our own and do it ourselves. I don't know of any new home rule petitions. This is really all I had in my file. I don't know yet of any Mass General Law acceptances that we might want to consider. I didn't have any in my file. Real estate right now, I had a request a few months ago from the Cemetery Commission concerning a portion of 264 Pulpus Road, which is either the Pulpus Cemetery or a property right next to it. And it involves some kind of conveyance. I'll get you all the information about it, but it seemed they were initially sort of seeking to have that on the special, and we said we'll consider it for the annual. Establish a separate parking commission. This has come up a couple times at board meetings. I think this is going to take some amount of work that I don't know who would be working on it, and I had suggested referring it to the Government Study Committee. Today at the agenda meeting, we talked a little bit about maybe we think about more of an informal parking advisory work group, parking advisory committee, something like that could eventually transition into some kind of a parking commission that would be separate from the board, but perhaps in the meantime, this other group could give you specific recommendations about parking types of things. So that might be something to think about. And lastly, ballot questions. So with regard to ballot questions, the town meeting warrant is intended to be adopted mid-January. And the idea would be to adopt ballot questions at the same time so that we can have the ballot questions and the annual town meeting items on the same warrant. And have it published, have the ballot questions known before town meeting so that when we have associated items at town meeting for appropriations specifically, they'll be able to come up at the annual election, which is, a week or two later. So specifically, this is probably going to relate to some capital projects, and you'll get more information about this along the way, but there's at least two that I think are going to be recommended for debt exclusions. And we would want to, I think, put them on the annual at the same time, at the annual election, at the same time we're adopting the annual town meeting warrant, so that we don't have to call a special election after the annual town meeting. It's just a timing expense kind of a thing. But I'm not sure what other ballot questions anybody might want to think about. I've heard a little bit of talk about some kind of non-binding types of things, but I'm not sure what they specifically are. So, something to think about. Citizen article deadline, as I mentioned earlier, is Monday, November 20th. So I will probably update you again about this after that, when we have more citizen warrant articles and when the board's had a little more time to think about these articles. But I'm not going to hold my breath, but maybe it won't be that bad.
You just jinxed
I
us.
probably shouldn't have said that.
I'd really, particularly in light of the timeline that Desmond gave us, I think having some sort of parking, maybe it's not a commission, but like you said, work group, or not letting go of the possibility of having our own study of our parking needs side by side. It won't be side by side in the next 6 months, but at least some way to sort of weigh and gauge what they're going to come back with.
Thank you for mentioning that, because also what I forgot to put on here until just now is under the zoning section, Harbor Place times 1 or 2 potential zoning articles, I think is the intent for the annual. So.
I'd just like to I'd ask the board, are we going to address the issue of the island home and have articles on the annual town meeting next year? Should we put? Are we going to come before the community and really say this is what we're doing with the island home, and this is what we're proposing as a board of selectmen, and we've got the following articles to address it. I think it's important. I think we've studied this, many times. It was rejected at the last town meeting. We had I guess I call it a wide-ranging discussion at our last board meeting. And it's an issue that we should be debating over the next several months and have something on the town for the next town meeting to address it. I feel very strongly about that. And it should be done in public, in this forum here, and not as part of an internal discussion. I got an email from Libby asking if I'd participate on another work group, another internal discussion, and I'm just not willing to do that because I think this conversation needs to be in the public domain. So I would suggest that we add a placeholder for our island home warrant article for the annual town meeting.
I mean, I'm happy to move something forward, but what? A real estate acquisition? What are we talking about?
Well, I think if we
don't
put it
have
on,
anything.
if we put it on, that will put the burden on us to come up with some suggestions, and I really think we need that discipline. This is an important. It's an important component of the services we deliver to our community, and for us to have another town meeting where we're not addressing it, I'm very uncomfortable doing that. So.
Yeah, I'd be comfortable. I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
I'd be comfortable putting it on if we dig into it enough in enough detail to know what our options are, and if the options are, a smaller version in one place, or closure or whatever, we need to be able to say it's this or that. You've got to vote for this, or I just think a lot of the things that happened, we don't need to rehash it all, but a lot of what happened was a lot of, in my opinion, magical thinking, where people thought, well, it can be here and it can do this and it can be whatever and it doesn't matter what it costs and, we can run it. There's a lot of magical thinking that, somehow if we're going to put something on, it has to be, we have to have done our homework and say, this is it or not. We have to, and if we can get to that level, I'm with you, Jim. I think we need to say, here's what we're doing and here's the best thing we can do and here's our option, here's our shot at it. But if we don't go in with any urgency and we allow people to sort of pull it a bunch of different directions for a bunch of different reasons, then we are going to end up disappointed again.
We need to talk about it now, not in January like we did last time, because people said, we were. So I would add that to the list of articles to consider.
Madam Chairman, I just want to clarify a little bit about the email that I sent earlier. It was as a direct result of the board's discussion last week to try to get together a group of individuals who've already been involved in the discussion to do some brainstorming about what exactly are our options and to try to come up with some kind of a framework for the board discussion that the board asked to have at the meeting last week, which I imagine would happen sometime within the next month or so, but certainly before the end of the year as we're going through this. But
And my only issue is that should be transparent and done in the public forum rather than a kind of an internal group.
Okay.
But it's just a matter of how you want to approach it. So.
I don't have to have any selectmen on it. I can just do it as an internal discussion, and the idea was that we would present our where we are, just really more of a kind of a review of the last 4 years or so of what we've done and what's been put forward, what the options are, and have a discussion like that. So I'm perfectly happy to do that on my own with my people that I was going to gather together. But I have no idea right now what sort of article we'd put forward.
And the intention was to have a board discussion on November 15th, so very soon.
And I think having a framework for that discussion is essential, because I think otherwise it already sounds like it's falling back into the same conversation, same approach as where it ended up before last April. And I really think that we have to step back and look at what really happened, what people said, and where we went wrong. So I don't think a framework for the discussion, not to make it as transparent as possible, but I think we do need some help having that framework and guidance. And I think Ireland Home is crucially important and it's something that we have to make a priority, but I really would be very careful about rushing a plan forward that is not well thought out and then doesn't have support before it even gets to the town meeting, because otherwise part of what happened last time was that it was rushed, and these projects, getting consensus from the community takes a long time.
It does take a long time, and that's why it's been very difficult, because we haven't really identified a lot of options. And frankly, by this time last year, in terms of what we brought forward, we were a lot further ahead. We had schematic designs done of the property. We had an agreement from the Howards to purchase their property. A lot of that stuff had been talked about for a number of months before we even got to this state.
We had the operational and the costs, and we had a lot of that.
A lot of work's already been done that we can revisit, but
Right.
we're going to have to really come up with some kind of valid proposal.
I could see at least that's where something like a non-binding ballot question, depending on how our conversations go, might give us some insight. But again, I guess without a conversation about where we're at now, it's hard to know what we could put forward. But I would be very careful about going too quickly. And I think in the grand scheme of things, if a year helps us figure it out, I don't think that's unreasonable.
Madam Chairman, following up on what Rita said, I'm not at all talking about using the same approach. That's why I was trying to have this little sort of brainstorming session to look at other approaches, because obviously the one that we used wasn't successful.
Right. But just any approach does have a number of background steps that come into it. So we
Right.
would just,
Yeah, so
even if we
was-
come up with something on November 15th, a path, we're going to have to put a lot in place to move towards a path, most likely.
So I was only trying to get at how are we going to sort of organize the discussion? It sounds like you don't really need or want an organized discussion.
I think we need it.
Okay, well, all I'm going to do then is prepare a chronology, which you've already pretty much seen before, of what's happened over the past 4 years. And I don't really know what else you want to have for that meeting.
There was talk about maybe having the consultant here.
Yep,
that had worked for
Jim and
us
I
most
talked
recently.
about that yesterday. I'm going to get in contact with him. I'm not holding out a lot of hope that he'll come, but I will certainly invite him, and he could give an overview of what he already did.
And you may want the architect to come because he went through a lot of the, site discuss. I don't know if you want that level, but he was involved in a lot of those discussions and.
So I guess you guys need to tell me who you want there, because it's an effort to get that
Right.
lined up, and there's a cost.
I mean, I think Dave Fredericks had a lot of the schematics from the architect that if he'd be willing to come, he could probably speak to.
I think getting a group together, and if I think getting a group together is a good idea. I think it's to be able to put a framework on this, and because one of the things is what's the impact if we had 20 or 25 beds instead of 45? I don't think we looked at that in those studies. We were looking in the 45 range, and I don't. So I'm not sure that we've what other synergies are available. I think there's other ways to look to try to tackle this problem, and we aren't going to be able to do that at this table. Either we don't know enough, or even if we read the studies and know it, how are we going to implement it? It's a hard thing to do. Implement to a recommendation on a camera with 6 of us, I find it would be a difficult thing. I think be easier to be reacting to it if and if Rita would like to be involved with, in that call with them. If Jim doesn't want to, I'd love Jim to do it because of his expertise. But if he's not available to do it and wants to add his expertise at the table, then I think someone else should partly be there.
I guess I think it should be staff, but that's really up to you. I think the difficult decision should be made by this board and recommendations or I don't know what else. It's just I've said enough. So
I think that the goal and the idea is that the difficult decisions will be made here, but if we don't have background information and framework on how to discuss and come to those decisions, make those decisions.
Yeah, just a list of the the listing that Libby outlined. You already have the framework, kind of a chronological list of the work that's done, and if you bring that forward, that's enough for us to have a conversation about it.
I think that there was the thought process that obviously our approach prior was ineffective. So to try and brainstorm a few ideas to just get our discussion going.
And we could do that as a
Maybe we
group.
could go down this path. Maybe we could go down that
Let's do that as a group. I think that's important.
I think we will do it as a group, but I think we need the staff and professionals to give us information to work with. So I like both ideas. I'd like to see 2, 3, 4 options, like the one that nobody wants to talk about. What happens if we do nothing? Like, what happens? We're going to need Rachel and professionals to tell us what would happen. What if we go down to 20 beds?
So we can give them the options tonight.
No.
We could say reduce the beds, close it, rebuild someplace else, or build on site. Those are 4 options we have.
I wouldn't be comfortable doing that tonight. So let me finish.
Okay.
It could be we're going to put $10 million into fixing up the current building, or we're going to just put in the 1.2. We're going to go to appropriations, ask for more annual town meeting, and we're going to get the determination of needs, and see where that goes. I think there's a lot of options, and I think we do need to talk about it on November 15th, but we also need help from staff and admin.
Okay, so we'll work on that for the 15th. Anybody have any other warrant article ideas right at the moment?
The only thing I didn't see on here was going back to our strategic planning. Housing, transportation. I see that in here, but I don't see anything with environment, and I don't have anything right off the top of my head. But if there's, don't know if that's something that the Energy
That's a good
Office
point, yeah.
has some ideas.
Or are we thinking about an appropriation for coastal resiliency, or are we going to just work that into
Well,
the
that's
budget?
going to come through the budget.
Okay.
The only thing about the environment, like I heard, I've heard talk from time to time about water bottles.
Yes. Not yet. Not yet for me, but.
Okay, banning. And I'm not sure if there's, I will ask Lauren about any potential things from the Energy Office, but I don't really have anything ready.
The only thing that I've been thinking of, but I think it's too far off, is that, I think there's more background work that needs to be done, is that Massachusetts is the only state that does not allow the effluent from IA systems to be reused as irrigation. And there's talk that that will be changed, but I think that particularly in light of being at capacity or getting close to our capacity in the summer with our water needs, and 30 to 40% of that is irrigation, it would be something that I think we should consider. And I know that both Mark and Roberto, we've already talked about it a bit, and it's possible. But that's something I've been thinking of. I don't think it'll be ready for this one.
Okay, the next item is the monthly town management activities report, and that is in your packet, just to quickly take you through it. These are just some highlights of sort of recent activities. Union negotiations for the contracts that expired June 30th, 2017 are underway. We've concluded with police. We're working with SEIU. Those negotiations are concluded, and something will be coming before the board shortly. Employee health insurance plan design change is implemented. We've got our search underway for the Island Home Administrator. We had the retirement of the Emergency Management Coordinator and the appointment of somebody within the police department who will be taking those duties on. Number of different types of meetings here. Capcom is meeting every Wednesday for a couple of hours, really. We're having some good discussions about capital projects. Budget meetings are well underway. We're maybe about halfway through meeting with every department about their budgets. And we've had a couple of meetings about sewer regulation issues and some revisions that we're working on. Number of projects that are underway or about to be, that are all listed here. I won't go through all of them. You've been hearing about some of them lately. We're also working on some other issues related to leases, Academy Hill and Matticat Land Trust MOU for use of the beach in Matticat. That's currently with Town Council. Strategic planning, I think we've finally pinned down a couple of dates in January. I think it's January, right?
Yeah, it was January
Last day.
16th and February 1st.
Okay, thank you. So we'll be working on with our facilitator on getting ready for that. We've got the special town meeting, special election coming up. We had a marijuana forum late last week. We'll talk about that in a short time. I'm starting to hopefully shortly work on establishing a proposed work group for the board's consideration in connection with the landfill contract expiration. Doesn't expire till 2025, but we've talked about getting that underway shortly. We had the Moody's presentation last week. We have not yet heard from them as to whether or not we're going to get our bond rating increase, but please keep your fingers crossed. There's been the discussion about the Tom Nevers Park master planning, coastal resiliency planning. We've had a couple of staff meetings about that and met with, talked anyway by phone with a consultant who has given us a proposal to get that planning process underway. I'm hopefully shortly going to get to the board a scope of work for the Matticat Water Quality Improvement Project. I know I've said that a couple of times now, but I have had a couple of calls with staff and an engineering firm that is going to help us with this, that has helped write the scope. Really, they have written the scope and will help us get an RFP out and then help us along the way with whoever we engage to do the work. Lastly, my employment contract requires Board of Selectmen approval for the carryover of accumulated unused vacation time of more than 3 weeks. I currently have 3.7 weeks accumulated, so I need your approval to carry it over.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
that's it for my report.
Well, selectmen's reports and comments. We did have the recreational marijuana forum this week. Or this past week. And Jason and I were there. I think that, and Rita
I
was
was there,
there in the audience. And I don't know if the other two of you got to watch it. But it was informative. And
What were your big takeaways from it?
my takeaway, which it's a little bit hard because it was a fairly full room, which was great, but was it representative of the whole community? I'm not sure. But the people who were there were definitely some strong opinions. I would say that no one wants a ban, that they definitely stick by the vote. There was a bit of confusion between like the medical and the retail commercial use.
People think that we're banning medical. A guy came up to me this afternoon and thinks that it's still unclear. And I said, no, that's not what we're doing at all. But
I just didn't get the impression that people wanted us to go forth with the process of doing a ban or a limitation on the number of stores, that they thought the free market would likely deal with that. There were also people who said that why can't it be in all commercial zoning? We don't mind if it's on Main Street. You have a liquor store on Main Street. You have bars on Main Street. And then there were people with concerns. I think that there was a fair amount of support for the moratorium because I think a lot of people understood that the rules aren't all in place yet, and that's hard to navigate even as a business going in. There were definitely some worries about it too, that it was sort of kicking the can down the road, which was really not the intention. And the medical will move forward. It doesn't impact that. It's always hard from a big group to get all of the points, and it's a matter of who comes up to the mic. But I think that there were some concerns that the zoning was too restrictive, that either more parcels need to be put into these newer commercial zones that have been created as we phase out the RC and RC2, or that maybe we need to either open it up to all commercial or to include other commercial zones, like maybe CMI or C-Tech, I don't know. So those were my takeaways, but I was kind of curious what everybody else thought.
I thought there was pretty much across the board, it was a sense of not wanting to have zoning be too restrictive, which I thought was interesting, and feeling that the marketplace would naturally restrict. One of the things that was mentioned a couple times was keeping it sort of for the community, and I was thinking a little bit more about that, the conversation about having it on Main Street, and is Main Street really for the community, and people kind of going back and forth about not being concerned about having it on Main Street from a sort of it's bringing down the image of the town, but is it providing for the town? And just thinking about, how you can, how we could zone or how we could do something for that. I think that going forward in the next 6 days, making sure that it's clear that it's not medical we're talking about. And I think calling it temporary moratorium, just so as not to confuse it. But I had the same takeaways as you.
A retail establishment on Main Street would certainly help with downtown revitalization. It would create a lot of traffic, and maybe people would go out and, I'm told people get the munchies when they smoke. Maybe they'll go out to a restaurant afterwards, and
yeah, it's interesting right now in Aspen. The community is completely split. They allowed it in the downtown area. I've read a bunch of stuff online. I have a friend who still writes out there, and they pretty much embraced it. And then all of a sudden, they're dealing with some of the unforeseen consequences. The signs that I talked about earlier. Early on, it was edibles, but Colorado's kind of getting a handle on that. It seems like right now, I think they've got 8 with 5 in the pipeline, and about half the town is feeling that it is not in keeping with the community, and so it's it's impacting certain businesses, and it's a different vibe going on. And so there's half the town saying that, and the other half is saying, let it rip. We this is fine with us. Like, we want them everywhere. And so they really have to and Snowmass didn't do it. And so Snowmass is leaking business to Aspen. So now Snowmass is thinking they have to add them. These things are doing $1 million or $2 million a year each. So there's a huge financial incentive to get into this business, the retail part of it. And, so it's very interesting. It's not, there's positives and negatives to this. And I think people, which is why I keep going back to, I think we should do it, but I think we should do it in a measured, restrained way to make sure, we don't do it. I've had 3 different people contact me today about it. And, with varying levels of involvement and et cetera with the industry and questions about what we're doing, et cetera. And one of them, basically almost grew up in Amsterdam and said that, even Amsterdam made mistakes. He said they started out with it in bars and restaurants, and you were doing both, and they've had to separate it. So even places that are known for it have had to make changes for their community. So I just think there's a lot of policy implications. There's a lot of implications on the island that we're trying hard to get control of the big party scenes and the huge number of kids. And, is this just going to keep going? So I just think that, I think we should do it, but I think we should be careful and do it in an intelligent way and understand what the rules are before we embrace it. So.
I mean, my feeling all along was that these articles were the responsible path to take, but it's going to be up to the community to decide. We're just putting forth the choices.
Yeah, and there was the governor of Colorado, his comment in the situation was along the lines of, at this point, it's not his job to decide if it's the right decision. It's making sure that the policies are in place in the way that the community wants it. And I think that I haven't heard, and I think this goes to Dawn's point, we're limited to the people that are willing to come up to the mic, and it would be great to have other ways to get information and people's thoughts, but that there hasn't been, I haven't heard a lot of conversation about, not having a dispensary or not having it on main, and if anything, more of a, how restrictive do we need to be? And I think you're right about it's easier to add on rather than to try and take back, but at the same time, trying to do what the community's asking, really.
It may be, in terms of the turnout for town meeting, maybe along the lines of the Island Home, that was a lightning rod, and there wasn't a huge consent, there wasn't a huge bias in favor of the project. There were a lot of people who weren't in favor of it for a lot of different reasons, so they came out and drove. And we may see this. We may have the same experience with marijuana, in terms of the articles that we put forward.
One thing that's interesting is a couple of the people that are most sort of involved with the marijuana trade, shall we say, are some they were in favor of a moratorium, which a temporary moratorium. As soon as they realize that that we'll have the medical will have a lab, and that we may figure out what the what a growers association might do, all of a sudden they're a little bit like, oh, okay, this seems like we're heading the right direction. It was interesting. It's because if you think about it, there's island people who, and I hear numbers of like there's 1,000 people growing, and I don't know that there's that many, but from people doing it, I don't know that that's true. But regardless, there's an opportunity for island people to do that. Whereas if you bring in an off-island group and they find a way to ship everything over, then the money is going right off the island. And if it's $4 million a year, if we have 1 or 2 of them and they're doing a couple $1 million a year, is that money staying here and flowing through the community? Are we, are our 1,000 growers, let's say there's 100 growers, are they growing their 6 plants or 12 plants and putting in a cooperative and sending it off and money staying here? Or are we are we embracing, sort of big business and let it sort of, there are other, when you start to talk to people involved with this, there are other facets of it, other than just, are you doing it? There's the business aspect and, and the types that they do and how they process it. It's incredible. But so I think that you would think that it would be like, no way we have to stop this. No way that, just let it rip. And they're kind of, some of the people that I would think would have that opinion sort of are okay with they're happy that we're putting it in certain places. They're happy it's going to happen. They want to see what kind of growers cooperative stuff comes from the state. And so it may not split the way we think it's going to split.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyone thinking of it from a business perspective, to try and finalize a business plan when you don't know all the rules is a very difficult task. My feeling is that people hopefully will be supportive of the moratorium because I just think it's the wisest choice right now. But I'm feeling that we're going to have to revise the zoning in April. I don't think that this zoning proposal is going to pass because it feels too restrictive. So,
Madam Chairman?
We'll see if my prediction is right next week.
I just wanted to mention some of the takeaways that I noticed at the forum as well. First of all, I think we need to really keep focused on what we're at town meeting for. We got a little bit all over the board at the forum. The moratorium, I think we need to keep emphasizing why we need it, and it's for what the reasons that we talked about here. The state regulations are not complete. That is the main reason why we need it, and it's temporary. And I think we did hear people felt that it was too restrictive. They wanted to know why it was such a limited area, and I think we tried to mention that it's a lot easier to go from small to big than it is to go from big to small. But we, I think, got good feedback on it. And if that doesn't pass, or however it pans out, even if it does, maybe we want to think about another proposal for the annual, because I guess we'll sort of read town meeting on that, but there were a couple of really thoughtful comments, I thought, made by participants at the forum who said they'd be happy to be part of a group that might look at things like that and maybe get the word out about how the areas, the zoning areas are being developed, or as part of the proposal of where the retail would be allowed. We probably might want to emphasize that this doesn't really have anything to do with the medical. The medical is moving forward. And really just try to keep focused on the zoning. Jason and I have talked about a flyer that Florencia is working on to get out as soon as possible so that it can maybe be handed out even over the weekend and get it on the website and have it available at the town meeting. So we're trying to make it simple and straightforward, and it gets a little complicated when people start talking about, the personal use and all that. That's not really anything to do with us.
Yeah, but people do need to remain clear that the personal use is already allowed, that the medical is already allowed. Mm-hmm. This isn't limiting any of those things. And it is easy for people to get passionate about some concerns they have. Mm-hmm. That just really don't have anything to do with us regulating the zoning.
Yeah, I heard a few people sort of say that the state has passed this law, so now they expect it to be implemented, and they're frustrated as to why it hasn't been implemented. So we need to explain that. And if citizens who are not in favor want to proceed with something else, then they are free to put that forward, but I don't think it's coming from the town.
And so that would have to be a citizens article
Right.
for this spring, so they'd have to get it in that time.
Yep.
I think from the meeting, I found the zoning really interesting. The comments from people in the audience, I hadn't really thought much about widening the zoning from the public. I've not gotten a lot of that comment from the public. I mean, that was one of my takeaways that I was a little surprised about. People wanted more options, and then I started thinking more about, could you cultivate a manufacturer in one place if the zoning was widened, and then the retail is in another? And that's what we don't know from the state, if all those things can happen, or if they can happen now. So it's not, that all doesn't have to
Right,
happen
like,
on one
Can you
place.
grow and test in an industrial area and then have a retail store in a
Right.
more commercial, a more retail area?
Well, that all, I think you have to look at some of the comments and think, and realize where they're coming from and realize why they're being said. And I think in some ways, the people on the record are setting up their arguments for further things later on. And I think that there was a little of that going on in that meeting. And so I think that's, I just think that we have to be careful. Like, you have to attribute, people have motivation. You have to realize who the people that were saying that and what their potential gain is for what they were talking about. And I think that was, and we as a community have to be careful that, that this isn't overturned and that it isn't everywhere, because that, if that's not what we want. And I think, so some of that was getting it on the record, I think, for future.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway.
Yeah, it also put my mindset in a place that it wasn't before, that it could be no on Article 1 and 2. And then what do we do? What does that look like? We're waiting for the state regulations to come out, and then we have the special permit is really the only other control, right? If it's no on Article 1 and 2.
I think it's good that you've mentioned that, because that has come up a little bit in the last couple of days too. If it's no on 1 and 2, then people should understand that the retail sales can be allowed anywhere where retail sales are allowed.
And you don't necessarily need a special permit.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
The zoning lays out that it's by planning board special permit review. If there's a shop that's retail clothes, it could turn into retail marijuana
Okay.
without a change.
Now, it's interesting. People think that these will be like a candy store and you'll walk in and there'll be piles of people. They're still going to be relatively controlled. Even the retail store is going to be relatively controlled. But so let's say there's a lot of demand for it. Then what you're going to have is you're going to have a line of people waiting in that relatively controlled environment to get in. And so, and that may have impacts if they're all, in the middle of their fun night and that's happening below a bunch of people who are in condos living or whatever, sleeping or trying to sleep. There's all sorts of things. We can all assume that this is going to be, that we're going to, like liquor, we have some control of the hours. We don't know if we're going to have control of the hours. If we may place it somewhere and find, geez, this doesn't work because there's 15 people lined up and they're loud and obnoxious and, boy, we should have put it somewhere else and but if we just, so I think that there's some things you can't know. And, and so I think, again, it would be great to know what the rules were going to be. It would be great to have a 1 or 2 up and running and see what the impacts are, to be able to then, tailor our next situation and not be in a situation. We've got a lot of complaints on liquor downtown, and a lot of times it's the establishments right on the edges of town. And in reality, the rules have to be slightly different. If you're backing up to a commercial district, to a residential area, and it's always been a quiet residential area, and your patio's always been quiet, you should expect it has to stay quiet. But sometimes the new owners come in and go, no, it doesn't have to. So if we vote these down, we could have those type of issues in commercial places around downtown. So I just think it's very interesting. There's a lot to it that we have to really work through and think about.
So this board was pretty thoughtful as we put those articles together, and got a lot of input, great counsel from town council, and I haven't heard anything. But I'm still very comfortable with the articles, and I'm very positive and have recommended their passage to everyone I speak to.
And I think the temporary moratorium, because there were a couple people that said, oh, well, why would we have the moratorium? And I do think that for reasons that both Libby and Matt have just made, it actually makes us the most sort of nimble in being able to respond to what the state says in a way that is relevant to Nantucket. So I really do hope the temporary moratorium pass, because again, I think it is the wisest way to move forward and be able to respond the best to what the state says. And I didn't get I had sort of mixed emotions leaving the other night as to which way it will go, but we'll see.
I think that there were a number of people who were there who want the retail to happen, but understood the reasoning for the moratorium. Because it's very, very hard to implement something when you don't know all the rules.
Yeah.
Just a couple more things, and I know we're probably almost done with this. Another thing I heard from, I think, two different speakers, some feedback, was that, this moratorium, if it doesn't pass, it's okay, because it's going to take so long for a shop to get set up. If no land has been bought yet, to start this doesn't happen in 30 days. So even if they could be ready by July 1st by the state, doesn't mean it's going to happen this year. So I thought that was interesting. Then my other kind of takeaway after the meeting was some of the stories I've heard of the confusion of, is it medical or is it retail we're talking about? When is this? A special town meeting? And it's very confusing. That's always what I've been concerned about. 64% of people said they want this. It is coming. There's nothing on the board here that wants to ban it. The people don't want to ban it. But we want to make the best decision as policymakers. And that's kind of the message I've been putting out. That's why I'm for the moratorium, because I want to see what the state's going to come up with.
Yeah. And it would also give us the opportunity to have more public forums. I thought, just a note, the comment about the possibility of like a CSA model or not brick and mortar, and whether that works or not, I think that the forums are great opportunities to hear some outside the box thinking about maybe there is another way to do it on Nantucket that meets the needs. So I thought it was good.
And I think the first comment you made, I think, I don't think it doesn't work that way. And I think people have to realize if they vote down the moratorium and we get 6 applications and we don't have jurisdiction any longer, we're done. And so it's sort of, just because it takes a long time for these guys to site their place and build it and everything else, it doesn't mean that, it's sort of, they've lost that option.
Well, let me just ask John, once they're allowed to do it and they move forward, even if don't open their doors yet, they have a certain grandfather? Is that?
Did you ever think you'd talk about marijuana this much as a selectman?
He was hoping he'd get away without having to stand up tonight.
I tell people every day that I just had another conversation with marijuana.
Dawn, and continuing your theme, it's really, really difficult to answer that question because we don't know what the rules are. But certainly, if someone were to apply to the Cannabis Control Commission on April 1st, the commission is going to send the town a letter and say, what zoning controls, if any, do you have in place? And if your answer is we don't have anything, then I think there's a substantial likelihood that they will be able to get their permit from the commission, and it would be too late for the town to regulate at that point because of grandfathering.
And that's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
So I think that's the point I'm making. That statement
I just wanted to
isn't
make sure that was understood.
Yeah,
so
isn't-
that's a likelihood.
isn't true. So, like the
Now,
idea
Well,
that
it is true, but 6 more could come in, not 1 or 2. It could take them a long time.
I mean,
It could be
we-
12.
Yeah, but they get grandfathered, and then they're in, and then they hunt around for a place, and they're just looking for a rental at that point. They're not even looking for it's.
So if they've established the use, then as with any zoning, there are pre-existing non-conforming use, even if you, legal non-conforming use, even if you subsequently enact some kind of zoning control.
Yeah.
I mean, another important piece is that we won't know any kind of special provisions for the islands until May 15th.
That's right.
But so there could be a grandfather regardless. No matter how cost prohibitive and how long it might take someone to actually get up and running, if they establish that grandfather, a number of people might choose to do that. Any more marijuana comments tonight? Okay. So, update on the Fairgrounds Road public forum. Hi, Tucker.
Thank you, Tucker Holland, housing specialist. Actually, could take one moment to thank you for keeping a placeholder for the Housing Bank Bill Home Rule petition. My understanding is the last authorization will run through this whole session, so it's probably likely it doesn't need to be on town meeting for this coming year, but we'll confirm that with Dylan.
Yeah, because I generally was hearing previously that just do it anyway, just in case.
Okay.
But if he says no.
Yeah, we'll check in on that. Thank you to the board for the opportunity to give an update on the public information forum that we had this past Monday. I'm just going to read from some notes that I have here. As you all know, the chair and town manager, I think, had made a good suggestion following some recent comments from neighbors at planning board hearing and letters in the paper and so forth, that there seemed to be, some misunderstanding and confusion about the history of the project and intentions and so forth. So Monday was really designed to be an opportunity to update neighbors and the public in general, in particular, on the history of this project and kind of the facts of it. So it was held here in this room at 5:30 Monday night. We had approximately 25 to 30 interested folks in the audience. As well, we had a panel, if you will, at the front, including our town manager, our chief procurement officer, our finance committee chair who sat on the review committee for the project, our deputy director of planning, and then Mark Hess of Hall Keene, the developer, was here as well. We stated at the beginning the intention was not to debate the merits of the project. There are two active hearing processes happening on the project now before the planning board and HDC. So this session was really intended to get the facts out there, as I said, and further clarify understandings about the project. We went through a 15 to 20 minute presentation reviewing the numerous occasions when this project has been on annual town meeting, warrants, multiple votes across over a decade. It has been on multiple Board of Selectmen agenda, public meeting notices. It has been on public meeting notices of the review committee and, on television, as well as covered in the paper on multiple occasions. So I think we're trying to emphasize this has been around for a while. It's been in the public for a while, and trying to correct some assertions that this sort of has come out of nowhere all of a sudden, the dark of night, and that just isn't the case. There's been a lot of town support for many years for this project. So the discourse was very civil, I personally would thank the folks who came out, the neighbors and interested parties, to ask good questions. I thank them for keeping it a civil discourse, and we certainly hope that the session was helpful in, again, clarifying understandings and intentions and so forth. I can share that the session went about 2 hours. We went until there were no further audience questions, and we concluded. The concerns that were noted were, I'm going to say, principally around parking and traffic, and there were other concerns. Additional items that were mentioned were around overcrowding of apartments. Mr. Heth and Mr. Worth addressed this concern very well. Hall Keene, what they do, their principal business is property management, and they have 700 employees. They do projects up and down the East Coast. They're very professional in this regard. And as Mr. Worth pointed out, there's a very heavy financial incentive in the structure of this project for the developer and manager to stay on top of managing the property well. So, again, hopefully the answers that were provided helped alleviate concerns that people may have had in that area. Other concerns, there was a question pertaining to would these be year-round rentals and not seasonal or Airbnb. It was obviously confirmed that they would not be seasonal or Airbnb type of rentals. They are year-round rentals. Another question pertained to what financial benefit the town might be getting, and Mr. Turbot confirmed that the project would be paying, real property taxes. Another question had to do would the town in the future potentially have buildings of the size proposed in the project right along Tacoma Way, where there presently are single-family home lots. They're subdivided into single-family home lots, and we indicated there has been no discussion of anything right along the roadway of similar scale to that project, or to the project proposed as it is. Other questions, there were a handful of other questions. I can certainly speak more about it, but again, we tried to address what the concerns were. We certainly directed people to the fact that there are 2 public hearing processes still underway, and that specific concerns related to one's property and this project should be brought forward to either the planning board, and the next hearing with them will occur either on November 13th or 16th, depending. They have a kind of heavy agenda and they're figuring out which day it will fit in best, or to the HDC, and the next meeting for the HDC will occur on November 14th. But that's kind of an overview. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
No, I attended. I thought it went, very well. I thought you guys did a good job. I think the biggest takeaway I had was we have to solve the parking. We have to find some way to write it into the leases and make sure that there aren't 200 cars generated from that, and that we have enforcement on the adjacent roads so that the neighbors are, their worst fears are not realized. I think, if we speak to them again, or if you guys are in front of the planning board, I think one thing that has to be realized is that this development is for us. This is for, the people that are running the town, the people that are working here. This isn't to bring a lot of people in from outside. And you look at some of the, and Nat Lowell tells me this. He lives across from one of the developments, and it's all people you recognize. And so, that's what this will be. And it will be that with some turnover, because it's a rental situation. So from that perspective, it's not something to be scared of. This is for your friends and your neighbors. And the other takeaway I saw from it is that we need a master plan of that property, and that would assuage a lot of those concerns. I think if they saw the massing of the buildings and they saw how it was going to fit in the landscape, and if it was designed well so the parking fit, and they saw how it fit in on Tacoma and, and what eventually is going to fit in on Waite Drive, I think all of a sudden some of those, I think some of those concerns will go away. I spoke probably 3 or 4 different people over the couple of days around that, and most of the neighbors are pretty reasonable. I think they realize this is happening, but they just don't want it to be, they don't want to see the mistakes we've made in a couple other neighborhoods. So I think that, to me, was the biggest takeaway, and I think you guys did a good job of sort of, calming 3/4, 90% of them down, so I think it was very good.
I was there for a little part of it, and I just wanted to echo what Matt said. I think that we've got to figure out the master plan so we can give the neighborhood some understanding of what else will go on those lots. I mean, I think that at this point we've talked about much smaller structures along Tacoma Way so that it was in keeping with the neighborhood. sort of hiding the larger buildings in a way. And I think that as policy discussion, it's going to be important for us to get a little bit more definitive on how the parking spaces along the road that has not quite been named, known as Wade Drive.
Wade Drive.
How we're going to manage those.
Yep.
Because sort of my thoughts are that it should not be allowed to be overnight parking, so cars can't get left there as overflow parking. But obviously everyone else can weigh in on that.
Is it, Andrew, are you and Andrew working on that master plan for that area?
Yes, we are working on that. Yeah.
To Matt's first comment, one of the things that I've spoken to you about, Tucker, and have spoken to more people about, and there's general support for, and I think it actually goes back historically to what it was initially called, but I think it's really important to consider calling it community housing going forward and not workforce or affordable.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, it really is housing to keep our community together and provide for the members of the community.
That was our title for the presentation.
Great. So I think keeping that moving forward, and it won't solve all the NIMBYism problems, but it will definitely help paint a better picture of who we're building for.
Yeah, and to your point and Matt's point earlier, there were questions about, well, who can afford to be living there, who would be living there. Obviously, we can't say precisely who will be living there, but the developer, we went through, what the income ranges were at the different restricted levels. The developer went through the work they had done looking at, what our town employees make as an example, and, the fact that there are folks that are in a variety of different categories who would be eligible to be, living in this development. And I guess we did take it as a positive sign that first thing the next morning, clearly someone in the audience was there to learn more about this housing and send a note saying, how do I get on a list to be eligible for one of the units? So,
Being on the review committee, one of the things that was very attractive to me about this proposal was how it really crossed almost all, essentially all income levels, because there are a handful of market rate units, and it really had very subsidized under 30% units all the way up through.
Exactly. And I think the proposal from the developer was very smart. They looked at, what we already have going on Nantucket and what is planned. And, obviously there's a fair amount of 80% level with Richmond and other things that have already occurred, the 40Bs that we have here. There are some obviously at 150 through the Covenant program and so forth. So they really targeted, where we were missing inventory.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee reports?
Comment. Just a comment to go back, circle back to the Island Home conversation. I think it's great that you're going to put this on the agenda for the 15th, but I'd suggest that we reach out to the different constituencies that have been part of the discussion in the past, certainly the Island Home Work Group, because this, this does need to be transparent when we're having this discussion. And also, we started this a year ago. We get quarterly financial reports, and we started with a quarterly quality report. And I think as we've reflected on the fact that we are the fiduciary board for the Island Home, it's important that we just not only look at the financials, but the quality of care that's delivered. And that's it. Thank you.
I had just a couple quick comments. I know NCTV 18 has the marijuana forum on demand. It's on the town website. People want to watch it. A lot of good information. It's 2 hours, but you flip through it and find out everything as you're preparing for special town meeting. And then I got a couple comments the last couple days from business owners on Straight Wharf, wondering, will the work on the sidewalks be done by Stroll and those type of things? And I heard today that I believe DPW and other people from the town were going from business to business, communicating with everyone. So I thought that was good. I couldn't answer all their questions, but I got a lot of the, can we start this after Stroll? And I didn't have the answer, but I said there's probably a good reason why it's starting now. So they were concerned that Stroll's a big weekend for them, that nobody's going to know that they're open or go down that way. And so I reached out to the chamber and said, maybe you can work with either the town or the businesses, and whether it's signage or something to alleviate some of that concern.
It's always hard to fit all of the projects into the winter season and into decent weather times. But I know everyone does their best to work around everything. Anything else?
We got motion adjourned.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.